Welcome to the May 1st, 2012 Shakopee City Council meeting. I call the meeting to order at 7 o'clock. Kim, would you please do the roll, please?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. Counselor Punt?
Here.
Counselor Lehman?
Here.
Counselor Clay?
Present.
Counselor Whiting?
Here.
Mayor Tabke?
Here. All stand for the pledge. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Item number 3, approval of the agenda. Are there any additions or corrections to the agenda this evening?
None from staff, Mr. Mayor.
All right, I'll entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Councilor Punt, seconded by Councilor Whiting. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Passes unanimously. Item number 4, consent business. Are there any items anyone on council would like to remove from consent or discuss? All right.
Mr. Mayor, just two corrections. One, there's a memo on your table with the correct or the effective date of resignation for Sergeant Forberg. That's in fact May 20th. And then I was also asked to remind you that 4F3, which is the Downtown Classic Car Cruise, that's sponsored by Brian Turtle and not the Downtown Partnership, which is no longer in operation.
Councilor Lehman?
Mayor, I'll move the consent agenda, noting that the updates were on the table and read and accepted by members of council.
Councilor Whiting?
Second.
Seconded by Councilor Whiting. Mr. McNeil, would you please read this?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Item 4A1 authorizes the promotion of Ryan Halverson to the position of Engineering Technician 4 at Step B of Grade 7 of the city's 2012 non-union pay plan, effective May 7th, 2012. And further authorizes the hiring of Richard Thompson as Engineering Technician 4 at Step E of Grade 7 of the 2012 non-union pay plan, subject to the completion of background check and pre-employment physical and drug tests. This also grants starting balances for vacation and sick leave. 4A2 accepts with regret the resignation of Sergeant Bob Forberg effective May 20th, 2012. 4A3 authorizes the promotion of Fred Roddy to the position of Sergeant at Step 3 of the current wage schedule for sergeants effective May 21st, 2012. 4A4 authorizes the hiring of Mike Santos as a police officer at Step 1 of the current labor contract, subject to successful completion of pre-employment physical and psychological evaluations. 4D1 approves ordinance number 855, amending the city code section 4.03 regarding fence construction requirements. 4E1 authorizes the appropriate city officials to execute an amendment to the Shakopee Interceptor and Lift Station Transfer Agreement with the Metropolitan Council. 4E2 approves an extension agreement with WSB and Associates to provide design and survey services for the Valley View Road Improvements Project number 2012-7 from Evergreen Lake to Saracen Street. 4F1 authorizes bills and pass-throughs to be paid in the amount totaling $688,113.34. 4F2 approves the minutes of the City Council meeting of April 10th, 2012. 4F3 authorizes the closure of Lewis Street from 1st to 3rd Avenues on alternating Fridays from 6 to 10 p.m. beginning June 1st and ending August 23rd, 2012 for the Downtown Classic Car Cruise. 4F4 authorizes appropriate city officials to enter into a contract amendment with Multi-Services, Inc. for custodial services at the Community Center and Youth Building, increasing the monthly cost to $3,913 per month. And 4F5 increases the amount of the contract for a previously approved engineering building door replacement project from $73,500 to $82,000 due to an expansion of work being done.
Thank you very much, sir. Any discussion on those items? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Passes unanimously. Item number 5, recognition of involved citizens by City Council. Anyone out there like to have anything they'd like to discuss tonight that's not on the agenda? Seeing none, moving on to item number 6, public hearing for Economic Development Authority. So, do we need to
open the
public hearing first and then EDA?
I'm sorry?
Mr. Mayor, before opening public hearing, you should also call or the chair of the EDA should call the EDA meeting to order also.
Before the public hearing?
Yes, then we're
Okay.
opening up simultaneous,
All right.
Go ahead and speak at the same time.
if you'd like.
We should have rehearsed this.
We should have.
All right.
You go first, I'll go second.
Don't you need to call the EDA?
Call the EDA meeting to order.
Oh, okay, now officially call this May 1st, 2012 meeting of the Economic Development Authority to order. Please make note of the roll.
Yes, Mr.
Secretary.
President.
All right, and with that, I will entertain a motion for open public hearing.
Motion to open the
No,
public.
I will entertain a motion to open the public hearing for the EDA.
Okay.
By Mr. Tabke, seconded by Mr. Lehman. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Public hearing by the EDA is now open.
All right, I'll now entertain a motion for the public hearing for the city council. Counselor Whiting,
Motion to open a public hearing.
Second?
seconded by Counselor Punt. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? All right, passes unanimously.
Sweet. Thank you, members of the council and the EDA board. This evening, we have a public hearing for a proposed TIF plan and contract for private development for a housing project. You'll see from your report that while I'm going to give you a broad overview this evening, most of the bulk of the presentation will take place on May 15th. The applicants are not able to be here, and so we're going to request that both the EDA and City Council continue the public hearing after you've taken any testimony that may exist in the audience, and after I've answered any questions. Just very briefly, the project area is adjacent to the Saks School site on Independence Avenue. To the north here is 169. The proposed project is on 3 acres, an 80-unit senior housing and living facility with a mix of independent living units, assisted care, and memory care. The proposed tax increment assistance in this case maxes at $1 million. As a result of the assistance, if you do approve it on May 15th, the project would have to designate 20% or about 16 of the units for persons at 50% of the median income in the county. As I said, in your next packet for May 15th, we'll have the TIF plan as well as the contract for private development for your information and review, and do a more full presentation at that point. But if you've got questions for me, I'm happy to answer them.
Counselor Lehman?
Is it 50% of the median income or, and lower?
Correct,
Okay.
correct.
President Clay?
$5.45 million of TIF for 16 units.
The increment that would
seem
be
like-
generated would be 5.45, but the total assistance provided would be capped at 1 million for the project.
So it's
Correct?
1 million for
1 million
16
in
units.
TIF assistance for the project.
For 16 units.
Yes.
Okay.
Any other questions for Mr. Leek? Anyone in the audience like to discuss for the public hearing this evening? All right, I will. President Clay, would you like to go first?
No, you go ahead.
All right. Just want to mix it up again. Counselor Lehman?
Make a motion to continue the public hearing to May 15th.
Second.
Second by Counselor Whiting. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Passes unanimously.
For the EDA, I assume there's no one who wishes to speak in the audience tonight? Then I would entertain a motion to continue. Mr. Tabke makes a motion to continue to
May 15th.
May 15th, and seconded by Ms. Punt.
Mr. Whiting made that motion,
I did, yeah. I
It's
said-
all good, yeah.
Motion by Mr. Whiting.
and I will second that.
What did I say?
He's a tab.
Oh, did I really?
Yeah.
Okay. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We are continued.
All right, item number 6B.
Mr. Mayor, I'm sorry.
Yes, sir.
The EDA should adjourn
Yeah.
now, because there's no more hearing before the EDA, so the EDA can
Don't we-
adjourn.
There's this other one.
The next public hearing is just for the city council,
Okay.
not for the EDA.
Thank you.
So motion to adjourn the EDA, Mr. Lehman,
Make that motion.
seconded by
I will second.
Pamela Punt.
Question.
It should be adjourned to May 15th, specifically to May 15th.
I'll amend my motion to May 15th, 2012.
And
I accept
the
that.
seconder agrees. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? We are adjourned to the 15th.
All right, with that, we go on to item number 6B. Mr. Leek.
Thank you, Mayor and members of the council. This one's a little easier. You're only asked to open a public hearing for the city council, as this is a tax abatement request. Just very briefly, before we get into the presentations, for those who may be watching, the site that is the subject of this project and request for assistance is in the Dean Lakes PUD, and on this graphic, 169 is of course to the north. Dean Lake itself is to the east, and Dean Lakes Boulevard is in this location. The site is about 28 acres located in Dean Lakes 8th edition. You've approved a new final plat for that.
Excuse
It's
me.
not-
Could you hold on just a second?
Yep,
Do we need to reopen the public hearing or open a public hearing?
you do need to
You
open
do,
a
but
public
it
hearing.
it could be after the presentation, but you can do it now, too. You might as well just do it now, Mr. Mayor.
Councilor Whiting.
Motion to open a public hearing.
I'll second.
Second by Councilor Punt. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Passes unanimously. We are now in public hearing. Thank you.
All right, thank you. With that overview,
Sorry, the public hearing messed it up.
no, that's okay. It was my fault for trying to go between the document camera and the computer, but we'll get there. That would not be the right one. I recognize that one, though.
Darn good one,
It
though.
was a very good presentation.
All right. I have just a few introductory slides and remarks. We have Tom Denaway with us again from Springstead, who has a presentation to make as well. Julie Eddington is here from Kennedy and Graven. And after our presentations, if you have questions, we'll be open to them. TriStar is represented by Kent Carlson in the audience this evening if you have questions for him. Some of this is not going to be new to you. The company, of course, is TriStar. You're familiar with them. They were founded by Pam and Rick Dahl in 1991, 1992. And the project they're proposing is a corporate headquarters for them, manufacturing facility on that site that I just identified in Dean Lakes. A little bit of a breakdown of what the project potentially looks like and the estimated value that preliminarily has been placed on it by the county assessor's office. The number of jobs that they propose to relocate to Shakopee from their current facility in Faribault is 55. Under the terms of the contract for private development that you have in your packet, the number of new jobs to be created within 2 years of completion of the project would be 25. The total number of jobs would be 80. The wage goal is 275% of the federal minimum wage, which is what the current policy is for business subsidy in the city. Just a note, as you know, on the 15th, we'll be looking at a revision to that subsidy policy. The tax abatement limit under this proposal is $1,055,000. The city portion and county portion are indicated roughly below that, and the term is 15 years for the abatement. The county will hold its public hearing next week on May 8th, and I plan to attend that if there are any questions for the city. The county has been following the lead of the city in this project, as you know. The contract for private development will actually be a multiple party agreement between the city of Shakopee, Scott County, TriStar Incorporated, and Bridgewater LLC. Any questions for me before I turn it over to Mr. Denaway?
Not at this time.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council. My name is Tom Denaway. I am here from Springston Incorporated, and we serve as the city's financial advisor. The purpose of the presentation tonight is to provide a quick overview of the development scenario. Obviously, Michael outlined a significant portion of it, but we're going to talk a little more about some of the details that went into the tax abatement projections, and then I'm also going to talk about what is tax abatement and the major components of tax abatement, including the statutory findings that are made by the city when they adopt a tax abatement project, the participation, the term, the impact, and of course the amount of tax abatement that's being provided and the form of the assistance. Quickly going through this, as Michael mentioned, the developer has proposed the construction of a three-phase manufacturing facility and corporate headquarters. This is the development scenario that the abatement project and the abatement revenues were based off of. Phase one has been the discussed 130,000 total square foot development that's proposed for construction in 2013 through 2014, and you can see the breakout of the uses there. Phase two would be a 50,000 square foot conductor expansion, and that would be proposed for 2019 to 2020. And then finally, there's a phase three expansion of the existing uses that'll be in place at that time of the assembly and extrusion facilities. And that's not projected until much later in 2023 and 2024. The developer has requested tax abatement and assistance to offset the cost of the development of the property within the city of Shakopee, and they've requested assistance from both the city and the county for a period of 15 years. The assistance will be provided on an annual basis and will be used to lower the operating costs of the facility, resulting in project feasibility. So that's a quick overview of the project. Now, what is tax abatement? Tax abatement is an economic development tool similar to tax increment financing in that it's used to subsidize developments that would otherwise not occur. In this case, tax abatement permits the capture of taxes for application towards the development purposes. Contrary to the use of the term abatement in Minnesota, by the definition of the law, the use of the tax abatement is not an actual abatement of taxes. The city is still going to collect the taxes. It's going to be a redirection of it, similar to the way TIF is operated. And in other states, tax abatement means a freezing of the value or an absolute zero collection of money. And that's not the case in Minnesota. It's something that's unique to our term for tax abatement. And also unique to tax abatement is the participation is determined by the individual taxing entities. Comparing it to tax increment financing, where all three taxing jurisdictions' market value gets captured and redirected to the project, with tax abatement, each of those entities have the opportunity to choose to participate in the project. In this case, the city and the county have chosen to participate in the tax abatement program. And additionally, each of those taxing jurisdictions have the ability to determine the amount that which they're going to contribute to the development. And additionally, the abatement value that can be captured can be based on a wide range of the values created. It can be only the new value created, similar to TIF, or you can actually abate the value down to a zero value. So you can actually capture existing property tax base for abatement. That's the range that can be captured under tax abatement. We'll talk specifically about what the proposed project has a little bit later. When you're adopting a tax abatement program, or by adopting the resolution, you're making two key findings. The first finding is that the benefit of the project exceeds the cost to the political subdivisions, and that it's also in the public interest because it will fill one or more of these needs, including increasing or preserving tax base, providing employment opportunities, providing or helping to acquire, construct public facilities, help redevelop or renew blighted areas, help provide access to services, or finance or provide public infrastructure. In the case of this development, the project was determined to exceed the cost of the benefit, and that was based on the but-for analysis that was performed back in March. We were here before you. My colleague Tony Schiller presented the results of our but-for analysis, where we, again, similar to the Sandmar development, we analyzed the operating pro forma, the operating budget of the project, and determined that the project would not be feasible but for the assistance. In that case, so we determined both the project would be unlikely to occur but for the assistance, and also that the future tax revenue generated by the development following the completion of the abatement equals or exceeds the value of the abatement. Secondly, it was found that the development is in the public interest and that it will increase tax base upon completion, and it will provide additional employment opportunities within the cities. In regards to participation, as I mentioned, each taxing jurisdiction has the opportunity to participate in tax abatement. Unlike TIF, where again all three entities are captured, proposed for the TriStar abatement project is the involvement of both the city and the county. And again, as Michael mentioned, each entity must hold their own public hearing prior to the provision of tax abatement. Oops. With tax abatement, there is a maximum length of term of 20 years, and the length of term is determined by the number of taxing entities participating in the project. In the case of this project, two entities are participating. If up to 3 entities participate, the maximum term decreases to 15. For this project, however, though, we're only setting the tax abatement term at 15 years. So this project, while potentially being available for while abatement was potentially available for 20 years, for this project, we are setting it at 15 years. As far as the impact on tax abatement, the impact can be based on a range of market values per parcel. As I mentioned previously, the abated value can be only the incremental growth, similar to a tax increment district, or it can include the existing property value. In the case of this development, we're only capturing the increased value based on the building that will be constructed on the site. The existing land value will continue to benefit all of the taxing jurisdictions, and not only will that existing land value, which is approximately $4 million, but any inflationary growth that occurs on that land will also be captured by the existing taxing jurisdictions. That inflationary land value growth in the land itself is not part of the abatement projections. So the school, the county, the city, everybody gets to benefit from that inflationary growth in their general fund purposes. So based on that, no existing tax base will be lost by the TriStar abatement project. Additionally, with tax abatement is the entity providing the abatement has the opportunity to make a choice regarding the inclusion of fiscal disparities. When I was here last week, we talked about fiscal disparities in economic development TIF districts, and in that case, there wasn't a choice. The fiscal disparities came from within the project. With tax abatement, you have a choice. The way that this district was set up, or this abatement project was set up, was that the fiscal disparities would come from within the district, and there would not then be an effect on the taxing jurisdictions on the fiscal disparities pool. So it'll be exactly the same as last week when we discussed the Sanmar project. The purpose of doing that is to minimize the impact on the tax base. And I can walk through how that's calculated in the revenue projections in a couple slides. The tax abatement projections are based on a market value and the 3-phase construction. The market value assumption of $40.67 was provided by Scott County, and the assumptions include a 1.5% market value inflator. As mentioned, the total tax abatement over the term of the project was $1.55 million, with a city portion of $512,000 and a county portion of $542,000. The difference there is the differing tax rates between the two entities. The market value that's being captured by the abatement is the same. On this slide here, you can see the property tax projections that were done. On the left here, we have the total market value, and you can see this is inflating through the project expansion and inflation. This gets converted to the tax capacity. And then here we have the existing land value that's not captured. So that stays, and that comes out and is benefited to all the taxing entities. And then the fiscal disparities deduction is also made from the growth of the site. So then finally, you have a net retained tax capacity of this column here, multiplied by the total tax rate, ends up with a total amount that'd be available for abatement, and then you have the individual city and county lines, and then obviously 0 for the city, or for the school district, and you end up with the annual net revenue on the end. So as I mentioned before, this is exactly like the Sanmar project in the fact that there is no impact on the fiscal disparities pool from the project. So it will be treated as if the abatement wasn't even used in that regard. And finally, the abatement will be provided on a pay-as-you-go basis. The developer will be financing the cost. The entire cost up front will be reimbursed by the tax abatement as it's generated. And the providing of the abatement assistance on a pay-as-you-go basis does shift the risk to the developer in the event the abatement projections are lower. If the values don't come in as projected, inflation doesn't occur, the lower abatement amount will be what it is. The developer will not be made up for that. It'll be the percentage that's generated each year. And then ultimately, if it comes in faster, the maximum amount of city abatement will be the $512,000. Once that amount is reached, it's capped at that amount. If it happens in year 13, that's when it happens. So that's the maximum amount. And with that, I'll turn it over to questions.
Councilor Lehman.
And I'm not sure if you're the guy that asked this, but in 2003, there was a master development agreement on that whole parcel out there. And I'm wondering if this is tied into that, because at that time, there was improvements made that were assessed back to the properties, and there was a cost per square foot
I'll let you take that.
number of buy down for the subsidy for some of them improvements and stuff, and I'm wondering how the two tie together.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Lehman. Julie Eddington with Kennedy and Graven. I represent the city as their bond council as well as their economic development council. You are correct. In the contract for private development, there are really two subsidies going on here. There is an abatement that is granted with respect to the master development agreement between the city, the EDA, and Ryan, whereby improvements that were done in the area for each individual parcel. In that 2003 agreement, the city agreed to use abatement from the commercial properties to help out the individual development properties. So Bridgewater LLC and TriStar will get the advantage of some of those abatements pursuant to that master contract. Then separately and distinctly, they will get abatement on their own parcel, and the taxes generated on that parcel will be captured for those abatement, for that abatement.
Mayor,
Yes, sir.
follow up. I think what I'm asking is, will the master development agreement arrangements apply to more infrastructural type improvements, site-specific to this project? And then what we're looking at tonight would be more of the operational side?
The master development agreement abatement, correct. That is for the infrastructure that was done, I believe, in 2004. Those assessments were levied. And then the new abatement is for the costs of the new minimum improvements. So the land acquisition, the actual construction
Okay,
of the building.
all right.
And before we get too far, Ms. Eddington, did you have a presentation that you would like to make as well, or just questions?
Well, I would like to sort of give a general overview of the contract for private development. It's between the city, the EDA, Bridgewater LLC, and TriStar. Bridgewater LLC is going to be the entity that owns and constructs the minimum improvements. TriStar is the one that is going to operate the facility after it's constructed. So TriStar is on there to make sure that, and they'll agree to relocate the 55 jobs and create the additional 25 jobs, and will also make sure that the wages meet the city's requirements. The abatement for the minimum improvements, the new abatement that we're talking about today, is a maximum amount of $1,055,000. The contract itself only requires the TriStar and Bridgewater to construct the first phase, so the first 130,000 square foot facility. If they go ahead and construct the phase 2 and phase 3 improvements, that's great. They will get maybe a little bit more abatement from that, but that is not required by the contract, mostly because the developer just wasn't sure when those would be put in place. And so it might be 5 years, it might be 10 years down the road. So we didn't want to tie everyone's hands because those phases are in the future. We're not sure when they're going to start. And I think that was all I needed to say. Does anyone have questions about the contract?
Councilor Clay.
A couple of quick ones. So the total abatement is $1,055,000.
Mm-hmm.
That's the cities and the counties together.
Correct.
The city's portion of that is $512,796,
A maximum amount, correct?
maximum amount. And Bridgewater LLC and TriStar are just different,
They're related entities.
okay, so they're
They're owned by the same people. They just,
two separate corporations. One
For
builds
separate
it and
purposes.
leases it to the other for
Correct.
additional depreciation and write-off.
I'm not sure. Mr.
Yeah.
Dahl is in the audience if you'd like some more details on
No,
that.
I probably don't.
Okay.
That's
Any other questions? I have a question on page 9, section 3.3, D and E, C and D, the assessments, the existing and new assessments.
Mm-hmm.
Could you explain those, please?
I sure will. These are very confusing. This is all related to the Master Development Agreement. And in the Master Development Agreement in '03, at that time, there were existing assessments that were levied, I believe, in '03. And actually, the payments of those assessments end at the end of, I believe they're already paid off. The last payment was, I believe, in February of 2012. And then during the negotiation of that contract, there were new improvements that were going to be spread among all of the individual development parcels for the business park area. And those were called the new assessments in the contract. Those new assessments were actually levied in '04 or '05 and go until 2024. And so those are the assessments for which the developer will now get abatement from the master development agreement, and that abatement originates from the commercial property. Does that make sense?
Kind of. So the new assessment, so anytime a new property comes online, the new assessment will kick in for that property, or is that specific to this?
No, all of those assessments have been levied. And when we talk about new assessments, that the only reason we're talking about that is because that was the term used in the master development agreement.
Okay.
But no further assessments will be placed on any of those properties and defined into contract like this as new.
Okay.
And then I think Mr. Carlson wants
Carlson.
to say also that as this property gets developed and new public infrastructure is constructed, the developer will be doing that on their own and then dedicating what needs to be dedicated directly to the city. But I'll let you talk.
No, that's absolutely true. Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. I'm Kent Carlson with Anderson KM Builders, representing TriStar in this development. I did have the good fortune of being here in 2003 and 2004 when this was originally done, so I might shed a little light on what new and old assessments truly are. The old assessments, the existing ones, were really the County Road 83 interchange improvements that were made really just to the south of 169 along County Road 83, where that new interchange is and all the lights, etc. The new assessments that were put on were the internal improvements to Dean Lake. So that's Dean Lakes Parkway and all that infrastructure, water, sewer, etc. that was put into place. And that's the difference between the old and the new assessments. And then in that master development agreement, at the time we determined, because of the phasing of the project and the current economic conditions that we were all living through, that the retail didn't need any financial assistance. But yet it could provide some financial assistance in an effort to encourage businesses to come to Shakopee and Dean Lakes in particular. So we utilized the abatement off of the city's portion of the abatement off of the retail project, so that would be the Lowe's and other retail that's developed on the hill, to help offset that. By way of example, the existing parcel that the Dahls are about to purchase carries an assessment abatement of $400, and I don't quote me on it, but call it $450,000 to $500,000, which is the remaining prorated share of the improvements that were put into place. So that rebate that comes back to them will offset a portion of it, not all of it, but a portion of it to help minimize the impact of that. So, with that, joining me tonight is Mr. Rick Dahl, and we're always here to answer questions should you have any. So thank you.
Do you have anything else to add, Mr. Dahl?
No, just. Good evening, members of the council. My name is Rick Dahl. I've appeared before you before. I would just like to say we're very excited about coming to Shakopee. As I come to the council meetings, I'm totally surprised and impressed by the number of developments that are brought before you, and we're looking forward to be a contributing member of this community. We're very pleased to come here. So I'd like to thank you for your interest and support in our company.
Thank you very much, sir.
Yep.
Anyone else in the audience have, for the public hearing, have any comments or questions they'd like to address? All right, Mr. Lee?
I had just one additional comment. Councilor Lehman asked a question, and I think Julie answered it quite well, but just a couple of little pieces. That master development agreement, when it talks about using abatement from the commercial properties, actually does contain a couple of standards, which I think you alluded to, regarding the value of the development that's proposed and the number of jobs that would be created in order for the business park properties to benefit from that tax abatement that's provided. So that's the one additional piece that I just wanted to add.
Beautiful. Thank you. Any other questions? All right, I'll entertain a motion to close the public hearing. Councilor Punt,
I'll make a motion to close the public hearing.
do we have a second? Seconded by Councilor Clay. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? All right, public hearing is closed. All right, Councilor Lehman.
Mayor, I'll offer resolution 7192 approving the contract for development, private development with Bridgewater LLC, Scott County, and TriStar Manufacturing and Corporate Headquarters Project.
Second.
Seconded by Councilor Whiting. Any discussion? Councilor Lehman?
Mayor, since I was here in 2003 and 4 for that master development agreement, this is it's an absolute perfect fit for what the concept was at the time. So there was some good planning, I guess, at the time. Doesn't always work out that way, but in this case, it happened to work out almost perfect because this is exactly what the vision was at that time. So
Just took a while.
just took a little while, yep.
It got there, though. Any other discussion? All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Passes unanimously. Thank you very much.
Welcome to Shakopee.
Absolutely.
And just as a brief aside before we move to the next item,
Please.
I wanted to take a second to thank former Mayor Schmidt for his work in getting these things rolling for us.
Absolutely.
He wasn't paying attention, but I was paying you some accolades.
They were very nice. All right, moving on to item 8F1. Mr. McNeil.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We're before you tonight to take action on 2 alcohol violation compliance check violations. These are relating to Chipotle Mexican Grill of Colorado, LLC, and Asian Han Restaurant. This is relating to a compliance check which was done on August 11th, 2011. As we traditionally do, we note the violations at the time, but wait until the servers have gone before the criminal court portion of that before we take action as the license issuer. Back in 2002, the city council at that time adopted penalties that have been followed in the area of alcohol violations to underage consumers. First violation is a $1,000 fine and a 1-day suspension of license. However, if there are no violations, $500 of that is held in abeyance for 1 year, leaving a net a fine of $500 again if there are no further violations within a 1-year period of time. From that point, we keep track for 3 years, and if there are subsequent violations, then the city code spells out what those what those penalties shall be. You impose that on each of those. The violators are given an opportunity to admit to the violation and can sign a waiver and admission of violation. Chipotle has chosen to do that, so they will end up with the $500 fine and a 1-year suspension of the second $500 and a 1-year, and the 1 day, suspension of the license. Asian Han, however, has asked for an opportunity to appear before you tonight. Simon Lay is here and I believe has a desire to speak to you. So we also have the member, Captain Craig Robson, if there are any questions relating to the police portion of this.
All right.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of the council. So I'm here to ask for leniency on the imposed fine of Asian Han. My mom was actually the server at the time when the compliance check was done. She looked at the ID but didn't have her glasses, so she couldn't really clearly see what the date of birth was. So that resulted in the whole the whole situation. And then she went on and did the whole legal procedure, went before a judge, and the judge recognized that it was a mistake and he lessened the penalty. And my mom knows that it was a mistake, and she would never intentionally sell to a minor. And we've been here in business in Shakopee for almost 15 years and never had a violation. So just wanted to ask you guys for leniency on the fine, and that it was a mistake, and that, you know, we never would intentionally sell any alcohol to a minor.
Thank you, sir. Any questions for Mr. Lay? All right, thank you very much. We appreciate that. All right, I have a question first here. So we've got the criminal portion of this that happens outside the city, and then there's the city portion that we're required by law to do. Is that?
This relates to, as the issuer of the license, then you have the requirement to impose a penalty if you so choose. So that's what's before you tonight.
We have the
Mr. Thompson, do you have
No, maybe
better
just a
description?
supplemental. The mayor's correct. There's kind of two tracks on this. The server that serves it is typically given a citation for that. And then the holder of the licensee is a matter for the city council to resolve. So they are parallel tracks. And back in, was it 2002, when this came to the council, at that time, the council, there was discussion, but the council decided as a group that they didn't really want to give themselves discretion on first and second offenses because they were worried about, you know, what's different from one from the other. So at that time, the council adopted uniform penalties, if you will, and those are what's in the city code. The council does have the authority to change those on a case-by-case basis, but that's why the process is up to now, is the city clerk just typically says, here's the fine, here's the penalty for a first or second violation, but they have a right to come to you and ask for leniency.
Councilor Whiting.
Do we know, since this ordinance has been in place since 2002, has there been any leniency granted?
No.
Mr. Mayor? None for alcohol. I believe there may have been one for smoking or tobacco violation. However, previous councils have pretty well held to the penalties that were adopted in 2002, in part to remove some of the discretion out there, because we've had people that have appeared before the council before, and there's usually a valid reason for it, and they've taken action to make sure it doesn't happen again. The violation, however, has taken place, and I think councils previously have wanted to make sure that people understand that underage drinking is not tolerated, and as a result of that, have held to the penalties.
Councilor Lehman.
Mayor, excuse me, again, I was actually here in part of this drafting of this policy. And if you look through the 4 different levels, I was actually the one that fought pretty hard for the first level being pretty lenient, because if you look at the second and third, and even the fourth, the penalties get quite severe with no discretion whatsoever. And the intent was, in the first one, you know, at the council at the time, was to design it so that, you know, it reads fairly severe of $1,000 fine, but part of that is actually rescinded for a period of time, so it's 500. You get to the second, it's 1,500, and none of it's rescinded, and it's a 5-day loss of license and stuff, so it progressively gets pretty hard. But there's a theory behind that. If you're consistently selling to minors, you're obviously not doing your job, or you're not training your staff, or whatever the case might be. And you know, it's a pretty important topic. You don't want to willingly, knowingly, and have procedures in place that allow that to happen on a regular basis. So it was drafted that way because we're trying to get away from having various different outcomes, because it's really not fair if you're going to have leniency on one and then not the next. And you know, it really gets down to if you have a large entity come in, and the last one was a small entity or something, and you gave the small entity a leniency, why wouldn't you give it to the next one, or so on and so forth. So it was trying to get some consistency to it and still have the first offense more of a, you know, slap on the wrist type thing, wake up call, minor type impact, to really set the stage and let them know that it's something that you really need to be watching.
Councilor Whiting?
Just a commentary, but $500 is not a slap on the wrist to a small business.
I
but-
understand that.
But I understand that we need to maintain a level that we can't have that leniency and go back and forth, unfortunately, and I'm sure mistakes happen, and I think we have to stay with our guidelines here.
Mayor,
All right, do we have a motion?
Mayor, just to follow up to Councilor Whiting's comments, I agree, 500 is a lot to a small business. However, on the other side of the discussions when it was crafted, you know, if you made it 200 or 250, that's not much for a large entity.
True.
So there was really no incentive to the larger type retailers, you know, whether it's your national chains, to a $200 fine on the first offense is they would just pay on and go on down the road.
Councilor Clay?
Question for council, that if we don't want to deviate from current statute or ordinance, do we need a motion at all?
Mr. Mayor, members, yes, you'll need the motion for two reasons. One is because the licensee did not sign an admission of liability, you'll need to make a motion, number one, to determine that the violation did occur, and to impose the penalty in the city code for the first time violation.
Councilor Whiting?
Maybe we can have a quick overview how these compliance checks are run, and is it something we do on a regular basis? Is it annual basis?
Captain?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, member of council, we do alcohol compliance checks on a regular basis. We do them annually. When I started coordinating them in about 2003, we had money from the state that we received to reimburse us for our costs associated with that. Those monies have dried up, and we use operating, our budgeted funds to continue to do alcohol compliance checks. They are important, we feel. I know that Chief Tate takes exception to the word stings. They're not stings. The police department has coordinated training for license holders. There are 3 trainings in the next 2 weeks at the Savage Police Department. So the Minnesota Division of Alcohol Enforcement coordinates those trainings too. Our police department has done that in the past as well. Our buyers are instructed to cooperate and not play games and play tricks with the licensees. So we feel that we do things above board, and we're not out there to surprise and catch people.
Thank you.
Any other questions? All right, I'd like a motion, please. Councilor Clay?
A motion to acknowledge that the violation did occur at Asian Han, and that we impose the standard penalty of $1,000 fine and a suspension of the license for 1 day, but then suspend $500 of the fine and the 1 day suspension for 1 year on the condition that the licensee has no further incidents of furnishing or selling alcoholic beverages to a minor during that 1 year period.
Very well done.
I'll second that.
Second by Counselor Whiting. Discussion? Counselor Lehman?
Mayor, I guess the question for me is, do we really open up Pandora's box by going back and modifying the existing code to put the discretion back in? That's really the question.
Yeah, we do, and I don't want to do that.
Because if you do that, you know, we're back to where we were before we even created the document that we're looking at and the reason it was created. You know, it's nice to have that discretion, however, it does make it a lot more ugly, I guess.
Right. Exactly. I don't think this is something that needs to have discretion with it. We either do it or we don't do it. And if we're gonna have penalties with regard to our licenses, then we do it and we have a standard way of doing it. But if we don't wanna feel the need to have the criminal proceedings and this on city, then we don't do it. I think that's a discussion that would be worth having if it's something we care about enough to have those, or what, Council Whiting?
It's unfortunate that the businesses have to pay the fine, of course, but it's even more serious that, you know, youth can have access to alcohol and the dangers that can go along with that. I don't know that creating that, I prefer it a little more black and white than having that gray area. It's a lot easier to maintain and manage the city.
Thus, the drafting of the current code and the leniency on item number 1, which is at the time what I was fighting for, so.
No, it's a good plan.
All right, any other discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Passes 5-0 unanimously. Thank you for speaking, Mr. Lay. I will continue to get my broccoli with beef often. I appreciate that. Item 8F2, goal setting session adoption. Mr. McNeil.
Thank you, Mayor and members of the council. As you will recall, on March 13th and again on March 27th, you met in a retreat setting to talk about the goals and objectives that you wanted to see the city pursue for the next 12 to 18 months, certainly while you were in office. This is something that we've done every other year. We had a good retreat that was facilitated by Bremeyer Fersman. First night we went over 5 hours. Second night we met again, and that was for about 3 hours. So we had a good discussion and identified things that you wanted to see happen. What we did on the first night was, as you recall, you as a council and the 8 department heads who were in attendance paired up, and everyone was to write down 10 ideas or 10 things they felt we should be doing over the next 12 to 18 months. Then 2 of them together, we narrowed those 20 ideas down to 5. Those were posted up on the board, and then everyone got dots and was able to vote for what they felt should be the highest priority items. As a result of that, we came up with a total of 12 priorities. The highest were the 4 that are before you on the screen tonight. The numbers on those in parentheses are your votes as the city council. And so the one that received the most votes was to adhere to strong budget and fiscal policies. The number to the right was when you factored in the department heads and what their numbers were. So budget and fiscal policy, infrastructure needs and funding was the second highest and actually received the most votes overall. Adequate staffing, and I think that was to address those items which are needed either in terms of the tasks that were identified now or the sorts of things that come up day to day. And then the fourth of the highest priorities was economic development. The middle set looked like that. Looking at strategic planning, which as I understanding, stood it would be longer term. Annexation issues, not saying that the city is going to go out and aggressively seek to annex portions of the adjacent townships, but to talk with the townships, work with them through orderly annexation agreements, but look further out in terms of 69 and 169 opportunities that present themselves there, and also looking long-term at what future industrial parks might need in terms of utilities and those sorts of things. Again, this would be in concert with the townships and with Scott County. The fourth of the medium priorities was talking about fire department issues. As we've talked before, there are a number of things that are going to have to be addressed. The third station in the Southbridge area, is that going someplace? And looking at daytime availability of responders. We'll say the lowest priorities or the lower priorities, but still priorities nonetheless, of the 12 would be to deal with the community center, talking about community ID and branding, those sorts of things, tribal relations building, and rental housing enforcement. Now, the tribal relations, I don't know that that's necessarily one that came in 11 out of 12, but as you'll recall, the nights that we voted on this, we had just had some good progress with the tribe in terms of setting up the intergovernmental working group and things like that. And so there may have been some thought at the time that, well, gee, that's already underway, and do we need to spend a lot of resources on that? Nonetheless, it was identified as one of those things that we wanted to follow up upon. And then again, the rental housing enforcement is something which we have talked about over the years, and just seems to be something that we may need to look at over the next 12 to 18 months. Traditionally, what we have done, if you look at the goals and objectives that were identified at the work sessions, is that you've directed staff to go back, and we will bring these back to you with a work plan. We need to identify the tasks that should be done in that amount of time. Need to talk about who's responsible for those, and talk about when a goal might be to see those things happen. Right now, I can't tell you what all those items are because we haven't had a chance as staff to sit down and look at those. But they're before you tonight. My recommendation to you would be to have staff go back and start looking at these and bring them back, probably not all at once, but in pieces so that you can look at these. It may be something that as you get into your second meetings of the month and you want to talk about bigger picture items, that we could discuss those in more details. Are there any questions that you have for me right now?
Mr. Lehman?
Would how staff goes back and looks at these items be prioritized as they currently are prioritized in this process?
That's your call on it. Obviously, you've got, the next item on the agenda tonight is to talk about what you're going to talk about in 2 weeks, and I know the mayor is interested in talking about the community center. That is on the top 12 list, but it came in at number 9 as you looked at the numbers on it. We can't do everything all at once, but I want to make sure that over the next 12 to 18 that we have an opportunity to address some of these. It's your call as far as what your preference is in terms of order.
Mr. Clay?
It kind of sounds like we can go ahead and make a motion to adopt this, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to follow along, only looking at first priority first and second one second, but rather adopt these 12 issues or goals, but then on our second meetings of the month where we're specifically talking about things, we may highlight or look at parts of it, maybe number 1 or 2 first, and then jump down to number 6, then go back to number 3. As issues come up and present themselves, they're.
Yeah, I think
it's more of a fluid. We're looking at more of a fluid thing here than a rigid. This is the list, and then we should attack them in that order.
My thought would be that you need to adopt these and endorse these as 12 items that you want to look at over the next 12 to 18. We are going to have to be flexible. Quite frankly, some of these are major discussion items, and we're not going to take care of them in a single evening.
Yeah.
Some of these won't be fully addressed.
Or a single year or 2, or maybe term.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right, or even a decade. I mean, they're things that we can.
Oh, let's not be that pessimistic.
Well, no, there are things like that we can set up, economic development, for example, we can set up for the long term.
Oh, yeah, well,
And-
we're looking 20 years out for that. you
Right,
know.
exactly. So the way I see these is that like budget and fiscal policy is a very broad category that we need to have as a priority in everything that we talk about. I mean, this is something that we need to be fiscally responsible no matter what we're doing. Adequate staffing is something we need to. There are specific items that we need to address and slice out, but there's also the overall staffing that we need to be cognizant of every time that we have a discussion, whether staff can handle it, whether we need to hire someone to help handle it, those kinds of things. And then there are specific issues like the fire department that is generally one issue that we need to tackle, and we get that issue, it's more issue and
Well, there's two
Base.
issues there. There's the physical building of the next
Right.
fire station, as well as the day staffing.
So limited issues. I mean, we don't have anything on here that's public safety, which that would be something we consider a priority, I assume, but it's not one of the 12. So it's, that's the way I look at it, as there are individual items to hit, but also other things that we need to be cognizant of every time. Councilor Lehman.
I'm confused. I want to know why we did this process over 2 nights. What was the intent, and what did we want to get out of this process?
What we as staff need is some direction from you as far as what you think are the most important things for us to work on.
Does this not say that?
If you adopt this tonight, it gives us a direction that, yes, these are a dozen items that you'd like to see, not necessarily solved, but at least researched and identified in terms of what the costs are. And you can either then start to plan what your budgeting process is going to be to address some of these, or figure that some of these just are really long-term. We aren't going to be able to get these all resolved within the next, well, before January 1st of 2014.
It sounds like staff just wants us to formally say, yeah.
Go play in the sandbox with these things?
Yeah.
What's your concern?
Well, it seems like we took a lot of time out to figure out where our high priorities are, where our medium priorities are, where our low priorities are, and now we're talking about maybe going over to the low priority pool, and then maybe over to the medium, and then maybe over to the high, and to me, it seems like, why did we even go through this process to put them in any kind of priority schedule if we're not gonna look at them from that standpoint?
I see what you're saying.
Got
You
it.
know?
Yeah, and it's, you go ahead.
Councilor Whiting.
And-
Well, I see it, all your points, but as we're looking at this, the budget and fiscal responsibility that came up as number 1, and let's say number 3, adequate staffing, are all gonna have something to do with economic development or infrastructure needs. How do we staff for those issues? How do we be fiscally responsible while we're doing those things? So they all kind of intertwine. Those are our high priorities, but maybe a fire department issue comes up and jumps to the higher priority just because of the conversation we're having at the time or a specific need we have. So I'm not so pushed into the point where we need to go step by step, but I think, constantly be vigilant with fiscal policy, but also work on some of these other priorities.
Mr. Mayor? I'm sorry. And these are not, again, items that we're going to be able to sit down at one time. One of the things that I've gotten from the finance director is just a large number of fiscal policies that we probably should be looking to adopt that will help us get our keep our fiscal house in strong order. But those are items that, as she's going through, she's identifying them periodically, and we'll be bringing those back to you. So we can get started on those. We may be able to identify some at a first meeting when we sit down to talk about them, but it's going to be an ongoing process. And I think a lot of these are infrastructure needs and funding. Bruce has talked about, he's got a sewer plan as far as, if you're going to do economic development out on the east end and around 169 and 69 and in the area by Shenandoah, he can bring those in, but those are not just things that we're going to be able to sit down and say, yeah, that's great, let's go ahead and do those, without talking about how we fund those and without getting SPUC involved with it and things like that. These are all, none of these are small issues that we're just going to be able to address in one night. So we need to find out where you are as far as what your level of, for example, again, going back to the sewer thing, some of those may be that we as a city have to look at making an investment to put the pipe in the ground. That's an economic development issue as well. Are you interested in taking on that sort of risk, given the fact that economic development seems to be one of your top 4 priorities?
Councilor Punt.
I think just another way to potentially look at the list for us in terms of usability and what does it provide for us. You know, it does prioritize issues, and if we think about how we're spending our time and then also how we're looking at the budget, so how we're spending our money, are we staying true to what we stated the priorities were? And I think that's just kind of a bigger picture way to look at it as well. But if you think about it in terms of our agendas that we have, our agendas primarily focusing on these higher priority items, and is that where most of our time is being spent? That's the way I interpret it.
We have a lot of things that come in periodically off to the side that are not here. And, you know, that's something that we are going to have to talk about in terms of how much time we're going to spend on those others, just knowing that in March of 2012, you didn't anticipate that this was going to be a major issue over here. And if we're going to do that, then maybe one of these is going to have to fall to the side.
Yeah, so many things involved in this job as a city council person are very mundane sorts of things. It's getting sewer and water and drainage to properties and making sure that, you know, traffic can get to and from places. The only time it really sounds exciting is when I read about it in the Valley News.
Thanks, Shannon.
All right, any other questions? All right, someone want to make a motion, please? Councilor Whiting?
I'll make a motion to adopt the results of the March 2012 goal-setting workshops, the 12 priorities, and designating them as high, medium, and low, and directed staff research and bring back recommendations for the priorities implementation.
I'll second.
Seconded by Councilor Punt. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Passes unanimously. We have unanimous direction for priorities of the city of Shakopee.
Thank you.
How about that? Item number 8F3, discussion topic, May 15th, city council meeting for the second meeting of the month, just to catch everybody up. We have designated the first meeting of the month as the more business, day-to-day, short-term issues. The second meeting of the month as long-term, deciding more strategic type things. We had discussed that at that second meeting of the month, we will decide what the following second meeting of the month's topic will be. At the last one, I led an awful discussion, so I'm sorry about that. And we'll have more, not an awful discussion, that was harsh.
It was pretty awful.
A wide-ranging discussion
Yeah.
that
Long,
didn't have.
wide-ranging discussion.
It wasn't that long. We had long discussion.
Half an hour
before.
longer than we said.
Anyway, so with that, we need to decide what the following meeting's topic will be, and I would like to discuss the community center to get that looked at and out of the way, to decide what the next 18 months from our council's perspective holds for the community center, and what we want that campus to be into the future, if it is what it is right now, if it has additions to it, if we would like to see additions to it, and if so, how we get that done, or give direction as to what we think should happen with that. Does anyone have major issues with that being a topic of discussion? Councilor Lehman?
Yeah, I think to do something with that in the next 18 months is premature, given the failed referendum on it recently. I'd like to direct more of my time toward a higher priority of possibly looking at our debt service and overlay issues going into next year's budget.
Duly noted. Other discussion?
Well, if we're going to be talking about the debt service and overlay funding, why don't we expand it to talk about probable need to increase the levy to account for growth in staff for planning, parks and recreation, and fire station duty crews, which are all going to be hard pills to swallow, but we should start talking about that.
Mm-hmm.
The sooner the better.
It's not
Ms. Lehman?
it's not necessarily a levy increase until you make the decision that you're not changing anything that's currently going on.
Well, we're not having that discussion right now. We're discussing what to discuss. Councilor Punt?
It seems like if you're gonna talk about kind of the way that you laid out the items, it might be more worthwhile to talk about staffing needs first before talking about the dollars.
Well,
I don't know.
my thought was, excuse me, if I can jump in.
Councilor Clay?
My thought was that, what I think I was hearing from staff members during those 2 nights in our little sequestered group, except it was on TV, was that there was some, I thought, expression of frustration on their part in that, they find themselves working on things that we bring up, knowing or suspecting the whole time that in the end there was not going to be funding to do any of them. So I think, well, let's reverse that. Let's have our discussion about what are we willing to fund as far as, well, either the current levy or increasing the levy, so that staff knows that when they are talking about and looking at these things, that it's not just a waste of their time, because it's going to be, at the end of the year, we're just going to say, no, we can't afford it. If we can get some sort of consensus ahead of time to some general range of funding, I think it would be beneficial not only for their ability to plan, but the morale of staff as well.
Councilor Whiting?
Well, I agree that the staff did have some concerns there, and I think that would be good to alleviate that from them. Our budget cycle's coming up. In 2 weeks, do we even have time to get an overview of what our street overlay project might look like, or our staffing needs in that amount of time to have that discussion on the 15th?
A couple of GIS clicks, so engineering can get that for you.
Councilor Lehman?
Well, we can, because we've kind of already seen a couple layouts of various scenarios of how much per year, what it's going to cost to levy, and so on and so forth, which could be changed, but we saw some preliminary ways to doing that. From a staffing position, I somewhat agree with Councilor Clay. However, I think a bigger issue is staff doesn't know what the staffing levels are that they need, because they don't really know what they're supposed to be doing. If they knew precisely they're going to be doing X, Y, and Z, and they're no longer going to be doing V and W, they can staff for that and tell you what they're going to need. So until we can tell them exactly what it is that we want them to be doing and to what service level, it's kind of hard to decide what staffing needs are.
All right, so back to,
Chicken and the egg.
right, exactly, which that chicken and the egg issue is part of the reason why at this next coming meeting, I wanted to have something that was concrete, that has a beginning and an end, and there's a decisive decision that this council for the next 18 months is doing this. And if we have a big discussion that doesn't necessarily have who's responsible and an end date, then I just want to get one thing
How about
accomplished.
the next one, we talk about the price of tea in China?
Councilor Clay.
But I agree with your point, but I'm thinking maybe before we finally start picking out specific things, physical things to talk about, maybe we need to spend the first couple of months or discussion nights talking about this chicken or egg thing.
Okay.
And see if we can't get that a little bit more straightened out in our thinking and how we want to look at, funding versus needs things.
All right, so what is the,
Maybe that's the very discussion we really do need to talk about first before we get into
Dive into those.
anything else more specific. Or maybe
I'll
I'm
buy
just
that.
completely off base.
Nope, I'll buy that.
I don't know.
So I'm sorry, did you want to say something, Mr. Mayor?
No, I think the discussion has certainly been valid tonight, and this would be extremely timely to talk about your budget thoughts, philosophies for 2013, because in June, we're going to be distributing information to the staff. And if, I mean, the councils in the past years have been, let's hold the line in terms of either the tax rate or the tax burden. And if there are desires to do a lot of other things, then what is your stomach for raising taxes? I mean, if we go up by a, $300,000 levy or $1 million levy, what does that mean in terms of taxes? Are you comfortable with that, so that when you have your truth and taxation hearing equivalent in December, will you be willing to do that and go ahead so that can fund the things that need to be done in terms of looking at community-centered and what that's
Okay.
going to be? Or adding staffing for economic development, or doing, this, that, or the many things that we have out there and have not been able to seem to address.
He wants foresight and backbone.
Sorry.
Councilor Pond.
So perhaps it's an invest and divest conversation. What we're willing to invest in and what we
Don't want to do any
Not-
longer.
do anymore.
Mhm.
Because I do think that that's the one thing that we struggle with and that the general government struggles with is divesting and deciding not to do something any longer if it's not necessary.
So how do we, all right, so if that's the conversation that we have, do we have staff bring programs that they want to drop? Do we, at that meeting, discuss things that we think should be dropped? What,
Well, I think we just have a general conversation, like Counselor Clay said, and just amongst the five of us with staff present, kind of rattle on all these things, and at the end of that meeting, maybe we give staff some direction to look at some of these things and give us their input.
all right,
And get a feeling amongst ourselves where we're thinking as far as spending cuts and decreases, and
It's kind of the appetite among the
yeah, and how willing we're gonna be to stand behind whatever we talk about in May when it comes time to sit before an audience of taxpayers in December.
all right, so preliminary budget type meeting, is that what what do we want to call it?
I
Funding
like the chicken and
priorities.
egg thought myself.
We will have a
Is it
chicken
like
and
funding
egg
priorities?
meeting.
discussion.
Yeah.
Councilor Whiting, you
Is it like a funding priorities kind of goal
Yeah.
discussion?
yes, sir.
Well, I mean, the funding priorities will come in August when you have your workshop from budget, but from a staff standpoint, we really need some big picture direction in terms of, are you going to be looking at increasing the levy? I don't know that in 2 weeks we'll be able to come up with substantive things in terms of, we're gonna stop doing, this or that. That's also part of the budget process. But we need to know, I mean, hold the line, is that the philosophy this year, or are you willing to go to add more? And if that's the case, then what would that tax burden be on a typical property owner? I mean, those sorts of things that I think are more easily identified.
Any,
Get direction?
I think if my summary was what you're comfortable with, we can go with that.
I'd agree with what you're saying.
Councilor Clay, are you still confused in the direction? Nope. All right. Item number 9, council member reports. Start with Councilor Lehman this evening.
He's convinced the chicken came before the egg. No report tonight.
Councilor Clay?
Nothing.
Councilor Whiting?
I attended the chamber board meeting. They're still working on their sign ordinance proposal for us. They've kind of broken that into pieces and are going to be looking at that over the next year and a half. April 23rd, I attended the school board meeting, and it is official. It is the school on 10th Avenue in Spencer is no longer the old high school. That is officially West Junior High School, Shakopee West Junior High School. The old junior high school on Marshall is now officially Shakopee East Junior High School, and the other term shall forever be banished from our language.
Hey, I got a question. Do you know if East will have to play West in football and stuff like that?
Oh, I think that'd be fun. I'm gonna go on a limb here, and I'm gonna back East Junior High. And if you want to take West, have a little.
Sure, and I'm stuck in the
friendly
middle.
bet.
Yeah, I guess.
You poor guy. Anything else, Councilor?
No, that's it.
I could take East. I was at that school.
Councilor Punt?
No report this evening.
All right. Mr. McNeil, Ms. Linehan, and I toured Certainteed last Friday and had a really great tour. They make enough shingles in one day to roof 10,000 houses, which I was amazed at. It takes 7 minutes to get from the beginning of the line, where it's a glass fabric mat, to the end of it, all cooled and packaged.
How big a house?
Not palatial estate like your house.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
30 squares.
Yeah, exactly. So it was an impressive tour, so it was very good. Had Diversity Task Force first meeting last Thursday, and it was very good. There's a steering committee in charge of it. It is working independently, and they've got, they're identifying what their roles will be and what their goals will be as a group and what they want to accomplish. And then last night was the boards and commissions orientation, which Mr. McNeil did a fabulous job, and we got really good feedback, I thought, from people wanting, that got information on rules and gift laws and all that really boring stuff, but they were
Important stuff.
happy to have it. So, yeah, it was very good. Anything else? Any other business? All right, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn to Tuesday, May 15th at 7 p.m. Councilor Lehman?
Motion to adjourn to Tuesday, May 15, 7 PM.
Second.
Second by Councilor Whiting. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Passes unanimously. We are adjourned at 8:21.